Good afternoon and welcome to KartPulse Live, episode 3. Eric Gunderson, my co-host, is on his way from the track. He got stuck in the way, such is life. Today our guest is Wright Hugus. Bring him online here. Wright, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having me, James.
Thanks for joining us. So, it sounds like you're a pretty interesting dude. I mean, obviously you're into kart, so that's a plus right there. Well, where do we start? Tell us. Why don't we talk a little bit about your foray into kart racing? How did you come across it?
Well, I don't want to bore everybody, but I'll give a brief history from the very beginning. My dad raced cars back in the late 50s. This was a long time ago when drivers were racing just because it was like a cool thing to do. It wasn't professional at all. My dad drove a Triumph TR3.
Mm-hmm.
He literally would drive from home, drive that car to the track with some extra tires in the spare seat or the passenger seat. He'd have a can of gas or something. They'd tape some numbers on the side, and off he went. So that's how the Hugus family kind of started out in motorsports. This is back when like Roger Penske was racing, Mark Donohue, some of those guys. But I think he quickly realized that he was married, and then he and my mom started having kids, and probably this whole gentleman race car driver thing wasn't such a great idea to make a living. So he went to law school, finished that up, and then about 10 years into his law career, kind of got back into the sports side of things, got hooked up with some guys at Indy, got to know some of the Formula One guys, and my dad was one of the very first sports agents before it became such a huge industry.
Right.
So he was always at Indy. Indy was a big one. Went back when the Indy 500, used to last the whole month of May.
Yeah.
He would be there for the whole month. So he was always dragging me to races, and from a very young age, I was hooked for sure. Here's a weird side story, and I'll have a million of those. But I think it was in 1973, the second week of qualifying for the Indy 500 got rained out. A bunch of the smaller teams who hadn't qualified yet never got a chance to qualify because of the rain. So a couple of them knew my dad, knew he was an attorney. They filed suit against the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to allow them to qualify. And of course, the lawsuit went on for like 5 years, and I think they eventually lost. But anyway, that's one of my dad's claimed fames. And he also represented James Hunt, the 1976 Formula One world champion, which was pretty cool. I got to meet Hunt a couple of times, and he was quite a character. There's no doubt. Yeah.
So
I don't know if you.
how young were you were you still a kid when you met James
Yeah,
Hunt?
uh, this was a while ago. I want to say I met Hunt in '74, so I was 9 at the time. But he was a great guy. Met Mario Andretti back then for the first time, and some other racers. Yeah,
Yeah.
that picture's awesome.
Yeah.
That's my dad. Look at that. Look at that cowboy hat that my dad has on.
He looks like quite a character himself, actually. I'm just looking at
Is
him here
that
now.
classic or what? I
Yeah, it's
mean, you got
good.
to remember that this was the '70s, and it was kind of like anything goes. Um, and and if you can see, I don't know if you've looked at Hunt's driver overalls closely, but that round patch on his right lapel or his right chest, I think it says
Oh, this one. Yeah,
"Sex,"
yeah.
the
Breakfast of
the breakfast
Champions.
of champion.
Oh,
Yeah.
we can't say that on Facebook. That's terrible. Yeah, that was one of his trademark things. Yeah, and
Right.
I listened to James Hunt a lot as a commentary because I'm originally from Ireland, and
Oh,
all of our Formula One
fantastic.
coverage was on the BBC without advertisements,
Right.
and James Hunt and Murray Walker did it for the
Right.
longest time, and yeah,
Fantastic stuff.
it was really sad. I mean, he died pretty young. Was it 43 or 47 or
Yeah, it was pretty young, had a heart attack, which is
yeah,
so strange. But he was a big smoker. So I mean, who knows what really did him in, but I
Yeah,
don't think that helped. Although I've read two of his autobiographies, which are fantastic reading, so many great stories. And he was a big runner. Like that was his thing. Like he'd go out and
right.
party all night, and then he'd go run 10 miles the next day. So at least it seemed like he had kind of picked up that fitness piece of motorsports early on.
Yeah. I have another photo here of and well, it looks like an X-ray and a lot of pins.
That's
What's
that's
the story
that's
here?
way down the road.
Is this to
That's
do with your
that.
karting escapades, or what have you got here?
Yes, yeah, and this is what not to do when you're
Okay,
karting. Okay,
all right.
this is very very recent. My daughter and I both race currently. She's 19 years old, and so she races Rotex Senior. I race Rotex Masters, and we were in a race. I think it was the second CKT race of the season back in May of 2017. And we had never been to that track. We had never raced there. And we had taken the entire 2016 season off, mainly because I had changed jobs and I was traveling a lot. So we were practicing, we just weren't racing. So anyway, we go to this race down at SBR back in May, and it was worked out to be a pretty good weekend. There wasn't a ton of competition, but my daughter finished second in her class. We were in the same race group, and I won Masters. And I basically finished right behind her on the track. So on the cool off lap, we're coming around, coming back to Tech, and I pulled up alongside her to give her a high five because I was pretty excited. You know, after having not raced for a year, we had a pretty good
Oh,
day.
I don't like the direction this is going at all.
Yeah,
This is not
so
sounding
so
good.
I go, and she and I had done this a million times because she's been racing since she was 5. Um, so I give her a high five, and then I'm pretty excited. So I go to give her another high five, and I miss, and this is with my left hand, and my hand literally went in between the side pod and the left rear tire, and
Oof.
ended up going under the tire. So, so it was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Um,
Yeah, and of a pretty
yeah,
decent fracture
so
too.
had some surgery done there. What you're seeing is a plate and 6 screws, and then up at the top of the screen, my wrist also got jacked up. So they
Mm-hmm.
put two pins in my wrist. Um, so that curtailed my 2017 racing season for a little while. Although I did come back for the last race of the season and won that one too. So that was kind
So
of
that
fun.
was super recent, like 6 months ago, maybe
Yeah,
less. Wow.
yeah, yep,
How's your arm
yeah.
doing now?
Oh, it's fantastic,
Good.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
and if anybody goes through a broken bone or whatever, here's some words of advice. You do all of your physical therapy. I
Mm-hmm.
got lazy and it set me back a couple months, but now I've been hitting it hard the last 3 months, and we're back to about 98%.
Yeah, it's funny how much I broke my foot a long time ago, and I thought, no big deal, like broken foot, like I'll be out for 2 weeks. No, it took a lot longer than 2 weeks to recover from it.
Right,
But yeah, I vastly underestimated what it would take, and it was really only just two small bones. On I
right.
forget what the bones are called, but basically on this side and this side, on the outside of my feet, just little breaks. But I was in a
Hmm.
cast for I think 3 months or something, and not a good
How'd
time.
you do that?
I was working at a rental car track, and I was at the back of a cart pulling it back. Another cart came along and did this with my foot between them. That was a good
Oh,
time. It was a really good time. So I guess I was looking away because I'd just got my foot up off the ground when the two carts hit each other. Had I not done that, I probably would have broken my leg and twisted my ankle, all sorts of stuff. But the
right.
worst part was, after that I fell backwards, and there's, I don't know, 7 or 8 more carts on the track, and of course they're
Oh
trying to
boy.
avoid this collision, and they see me, so they're almost attracted to me, and I just see all these carts coming towards my head. I'm
Of
just like
course.
clambering backwards. So yeah, it looks like Eric is here, or at least he's a little bit sideways. We'll see. So he's still getting ready. All right, so high fives on the roll-up lap, rolling down lap. Sometimes a good idea, sometimes not. Maybe we could advocate for no side pods. I mean, you said it was the side pod, right? Can we blame it on the bodywork or no?
No, this was just me being stupid.
That sounds
But
ouch.
but I was excited for
Right.
sure.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a pretty special thing to be on the track with your kids at the same time. And
it's awesome.
my daughter's 9 now. And you know she hasn't really taken an interest in racing yet, but she loves to drive karts and drive really fast, and it's just awesome just to see her
Fantastic.
develop on every session, you know.
Right.
And sometimes my wife will come too. We have what's called kart dates. Here she is. Say hi.
Nice.
Hi.
And
Hi.
she drives?
Yeah, you drive. Yeah, out of 10, how much would you mark go karts?
10.
Just 10, not like 11 or 12.
45.
45. There you go. See,
Woo.
high 45.
Boom.
All right. Eric, you ready? You want to join in here? We've got all sorts of pictures of fractures and stuff here. So I'm going to bring on Eric Gunderson, my partner in crime. Eric.
Yeah, the
how's it
partner in
going?
crime that was late. I'm sorry about that. I really, really am sorry. So sorry,
It's all
guys.
good.
What's up, buddy?
I have a good excuse though.
What's that?
Well, I didn't break my arm, but I had a client that I've been slowly nagging and trying to persuade to work with me.
The feed for a second.
Can you guys hear me and see me?
I got you.
Well, that's good. Okay. Well, anyway. This is going well, guys. Thank you for your patience. You know, this is how it goes when you do a live show. Our back end
It's
is
all good, brother.
through a program called Be Live, and we're still learning as it's readily apparent here. So
It's all good. It's great that you're able to put in graphics and add in pictures and videos and all kinds of cool stuff. It's fantastic.
yeah, so I saw the picture there with James Hunt, and then you postulating
Yeah,
a little
buddy.
bit on the end of his career. It was actually, you know, it's interesting. I read a biography kind of book by Nicky Lauda, who obviously had, you know, the 1976 season with him, but he has a whole section devoted to James Hunt, and he talks about how when James Hunt died, he was actually in, you know, the best health of his life and was really active and was into running. So it was actually very
Right.
surprising. But I'm going to guess, as many of our racers and people that are tuning in may attest and know, just like you do, he lived a hard life in terms of abuse to his body. So I'm going to guess the smoking and you know, running at 100 miles an hour all the time probably caught up with him. But
He was a great dude, quite a character.
yeah, I don't know if he ever got involved in
Quite a
karting,
character.
but yeah, he was.
Right. I was telling James I got to meet him a couple times. The first time was out at Ontario Motor Speedway out in LA,
Uh-huh.
which now is in Fontana. They actually tore the original one down and built the new one, whatever it was, 20 years ago. But
That's
they were
right.
having a race. It was called the Quester Grand Prix, something like that. And it was IndyCar drivers, Formula 5000 drivers, and Formula One drivers all in the same race in a bunch of different cars. It was pretty cool.
That is cool.
Um, and yeah, I think I was like 8 years old, and I was around all these famous drivers. It was a pretty interesting concept, and I think they only did it that one year. Um, but it's back in an era when drivers, you know, didn't necessarily just stay in one form of racing. I mean, you're seeing it right now, and this is a great topic of conversation with Fernando Alonso. I mean, he just finished the Daytona 24 Hours. I don't know if you guys watched that, but it was a pretty decent race. He's planning to go Le Mans. Obviously, he's multi-time Formula One world champion. He was at Indy last year, and it's creating a lot of great press for motorsports in general.
Yeah, and I think that that's a cool thing that he's doing, right? But it's not without precedent, as you noted. I mean, back in the James Hunt era, or actually earlier, it was not uncommon for drivers to race F3000 or an equivalent of Formula 3 or something, and fly all across the country. An example was I was listening to a podcast by Brian Redmond recently, and he talked about how
nice
he was one of these drivers where he would fly, from a local, I guess what people would consider an SEC race nowadays, and then go race Formula One the next day, and people didn't think anything of it. I think Jim Clark died in a Formula 3 race, right? So it was not uncommon for people to travel around. Mario Andretti, AJ Foyt, people like that were infamous for being those really talented racers. I think nowadays, obviously, it's so much more, corporate, right? That
of course.
A Honda driver can't really drive a non-Honda thing, and I think it speaks volumes about how much leverage Fernando Alonso has in his contract to say, you know what, no, I know you guys want me to stick around in McLaren while you guys are struggling, but I'm going to go do all this other stuff so that I can enjoy what I'm doing.
Right.
But I think that's great. I wish that more people did that. Actually, even just in karting, one thing that James has given me perspective on is there's not enough people that should try different disciplines. If you're a sprint kart racer like
Absolutely.
Yourself or myself, often I think we lose sight of, there's these other options to go out and try a laydown kart or an oval track kart or different things. So it's something that I've always tried to do. I've been fortunate enough to drive go-karts and different kinds of cars. And at the end of the day, racing is racing. And if you get to do different stuff, it's always fun. So it looks like Wild Duck thinks that Brian Redmond's cat is buried at Road America.
Road America.
I
Yes.
cannot confirm or deny
Where?
that. I don't know the story there.
Yeah, do tell us the story. And where is
Steve.
it buried at Road America? That's one of my favorite tracks.
Inside of the carousel or something? I don't know. Steve, you gotta let the cat out of the bag here. Let us know where the cat's buried.
That might be a
That's
secret.
awesome.
We don't know. I know that there's rumors about around Mid-Ohio, there's large sums of money or old, really classic crash race cars, right? And that are buried near there, near Sebring. I think Sebring is one of those that there's all these myths around. But getting back a little more karting-centric, Wright, this might be a little more relevant to you, considering your latest adventures with your broken arm. John R. Howie asks, or actually David Gallagher asks,
I'm just going to say that was a pretty good guess on my behalf. I'm just going to say.
Nice job.
That was
all right. Well, I'm headed
that's my
there
favorite
to.
corner. It's the only reason I said carousel. There was no logic behind it
Yep.
other than that.
That's awesome.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, if you find the little
Steve,
plot,
I'll be there working the IndyCar race later this summer, so I'm gonna go look.
Nice.
if you see a little plot with a little cross or whatever
right.
Ryan denoted it with, send it to us at KartPulse, and we'll share it out, and everyone will see that it's there in the carousel.
Yeah, we'll share a picture.
Brian Redmond was incredible. He's an incredible guy. He's got some stories, man. He and David Hobbs, holy cow.
Yeah, they're interesting people. David Galler asks, have you ever hit a curb and immediately regretted doing so? And how did it go down? Now, I have a few curb incident stories myself, but James and Wright, do you guys have some good stories? Because I think most karters that start experimenting with curbs usually get it wrong once or twice.
Yeah, I'm a serial curber. to the fault of poor lap times.
That means you're pro curb?
Yeah, I mean, I figure if I can't go fast, I might as well look good. So, I think I nailed the curb once and practically jumped across the track to the outside, but there was no runoff, so I just hit the wall, spun around, 360 degrees, and in the process, I almost hit the back axle with my head. So that was a good time. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's what curbs are for, right?
Awesome.
How about you?
I use the curbs sparingly. I just remember that when this was a real eye opener. I think it was the 2013 Pan Ams here in Denver at the track at Centennial. I was running masters, but they put us out in a practice session with the seniors, and those kids are pretty freaking fast. And I had kids hitting me and banging into me and blowing by me all over the place. And then we go into this downhill section at Centennial, and they just went straight over the curbs. And it was just such an eye opener. I was like, wow, you can do that. And that's actually kind of smart. Probably not very good for your chassis, but okay.
Yeah, but I think at the national level, many of our viewers may notice, you go on a kart shop's Facebook page or their website, and they've got the race used chassis for sale, that are have only one or two races old. But the thing you got to keep in mind is they're doing that for those one or two races, going off those curbs. There's a couple really iconic sections, actually one here in Colorado, some pictures we've shared on the Carter of people launching through the air at Grand Junction. I mean, that's completely off the track, about a foot in the air, right? So,
there are probably some really good pictures of Scott Falcone doing that a couple of years ago.
That's exactly who I have here.
We've got some pictures of Scott Falcone, and I think people got really into that post. They were trying to find pictures of people going bigger and bigger. It turned into almost this like BMX kind of bragging rights kind of thing. There's also a great section that always gets some good press at Sonoma called Tic Tac Toe. There you go. Yeah, see Scott Falcone completely off the track.
Definitely a 9.5 from the Russian judge.
Yeah, but his nose is tipped up a little bit, so that means he's going to smack the axle when he comes down, which is poor form because it won't look 100% fluid. So I think that one I'm going to only give an 8 personally.
Okay, but James?
I would give it a solid 11 out of 10, quite honestly, because
there we go.
That's expensive right there. That's a lot of money, and also they've got the e-karting news sticker on here. So that's worth a couple of points as well.
That's worth at least 2 tenths.
Yep. And it's an arrow from Australia, so, I mean, technically the kart should be upside down. And he's managed to keep it in the correct direction.
Good point.
So, not bad. Yeah, not bad.
Jake Reel says...
I'm on my seventh season on my chassis, so clearly I'm not using the curbs enough.
Yeah, but you're a Masters driver, so it's okay. You guys have an excuse. You guys are experienced, and you know that in order to be around at the end of the race, you can't be doing stuff like that and throwing chains. Jake Reel says he accidentally launched a rental cart at CHMS. So that's another accomplishment.
I'm going to butt in here and say I don't believe for one second that was an accident. And actually, shout out to Jake. Jake has his own podcast called Rags to Races. And, he started racing 206 last year, and he's into all kinds of other cars too. But he got a 206 last year and started documenting his journey. So I'll give him a shout out as well. But there's no way that was an accident. Come on, that's what rental carts are for.
That's right.
We've all launched a rental cart or two.
Yeah, I couldn't say that on the other episode because we had people from rental cart facilities on. But
yeah, I'd say it. I think I've been banned for life from at least one go-kart track with the rental carts. I was with a group of racers, and we went to a racetrack in it was a fun kart track in Ohio. And I think by the time we were done, like all the barriers were at least 6 inches from where they had started. So I think most people that travel usually have one of those good stories of going to a K1 or a fast lap and doing all stuff like that.
Rental track shenanigans.
Love it. Everybody's got a story. So you mentioned 206, which kind of leads me to a topic you guys hit on in your last webcast. I just think 206 is an awesome entree for newer karters or maybe somebody getting back into the sport. I loved what you guys were talking about with Greg Welch about how to get those renters into a more competitive environment. And I hanging out at the track at Centennial so much the last whatever 7-8 years, it seems like it's always it's kind of we're ambassadors to the sport. When renters are done doing their session or whatever and they're wandering around, they always walk around and come up and they'll talk to you and ask you, what's going on. And if there's a test and tune session going on, they get to see those competitive carts out there. And I think it's up to a lot of us, to take those people in and explain it to them in simple terms that it's not that hard to get involved in karting, and it's really not that expensive, especially when you compare it to other sports, especially for the younger kids. My daughter started in kid karts when she was 5. I wish I had known about karting when I was younger.
Right.
I didn't start till I was 18. So it's definitely an interesting avenue. I'm sure you've got many theories on it, Eric and James.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple things there that are really important. One of the biggest ones that I don't like to get up on my soapbox. I know James and I do sometimes to each other, but one that I'm a big believer on that I think you touched on that I really don't think you can overstate is how important it is for every one of us at the track to be an advocate for the sport. And I think you have to be approachable, and you have to show people that at the end of the day, karting is about fun. And you can have the super fancy, fast, intimidating shifter kart, or you can start in a 206, which is a lot more user friendly, a lot more accessible for a rental kart racer, and a lot more in the vein of something that you can kind of just put in your trailer or put in your shop and not have to touch for 20 hours each week for it to be right, and obviously it still takes work, but that's one thing I try to keep in mind every time I go to the track, because places like Centennial or Dallas Karting Complex or GoPro Motorplex put the sport, that rental kart, right in front of the performance karting. And so you'll get those people walk up and ask, and that first interaction they have with the performance kart guy, if it's not handled the right way, or if it's not handled fairly and objectively, is really critical. So that's one thing that I wish more karters kept in mind is, just because you're on the super fast go-kart now, that's probably not where you started. And if you want more people to go play with, the more you can encourage people to get out there and point out that there's kinds of shades of gray of how much money you have to spend or what class you can run right away. That's really important. So it's something I try to keep in mind. I agree. I think the 206 nationwide has been one of the biggest influences on the preservation and kind of health of the grassroots, and even at the national level. I know personally, for my financial budget, if I were to travel and race, I would like to take a 206 and race against those fields, because it may not be a fast, super flashy go-kart, but the fields are really deep. The parity between the engines is super consistent. So that truly is a class that you can take from a local level to a national level. And yes, you will have to spend a little more money, but if you put the work in and you put the effort in, the engine's going to be there, the reliability is going to be there, so you can go race against people and continually challenge yourself. And I think that's one thing that we have in karting now that we should be celebrating more, and I wish we did.
Absolutely. What are some of the ways that CKT is getting new people involved, like especially with the young kids? I mean, it seems like that's where you really want to get things cracking. It's just like any other sport when young kids are starting to play soccer or they're playing lacrosse. Here in Colorado, fifth graders get a free ski pass to any mountain in Colorado. It's a great marketing tool. And obviously, as we've seen, I have two kids who went through basketball and soccer, all the programs, and then played at the high school level. My daughter's now playing in college. But we've seen this big business open up with these club teams. And it's not so much as very important what school you play for. It's way more important, way much bigger priority what club team you play for. So I guess I'm throwing the question out there, how do you get more kids involved in the sport? Because once the kids get involved, then the parents get involved and it snowballs.
Right. Um, I think you asked a pretty straightforward question there, but I think it's a complicated answer, and I think James actually has heavily influenced how I go about answering this question. So I'll let him kind of take the reins of that in a minute. But the biggest things, one thing that James said to me a while ago, and that I would impart on our viewers is, racing is expensive. It always will be, whether it's somewhat expensive or ludicrously. There's really no getting away from that. But if you look at karting from a value perspective of what you are able to do, James points out that if you go race Scrusa Pro Tour, yes, that's a lot more money than, say, racing at the CKT level. But think about the competition you're racing against and the level that those people prepare to, which I would argue, at least at the very national level in Europe or in the US, is at the same level that a professional motorsports organization prepares for an event in terms of how close the competition is. You can take a vehicle that costs a tenth of what those high-performance, high-downforce cars cost, and you can go race against people nationwide in many of the same classes across many different tracks. When you approach it from that perspective, the value of karting kind of shines through. And then one thing that at the local level I think is more important to realize is the value of the sport. One thing I was doing this morning, for example, was helping some friends out that are just getting into karting, a father and a son. And one thing we were discussing that whole time is, rather than going to play a club sport or something like that, Dad, yes, he's funding the racing, but he is there with his son or daughter and the mother as well that whole time they're at the track. It's very hands-on, and Wright, you know this. You're with your daughter the whole time you're at the racetrack. It's not, okay, awesome, go have fun, honey, go play volleyball, and you drop them off, and then suddenly it's just the coach, right? It's you're right there, and you get to see them challenge themselves and interact with themselves. And I think at the CKT level, we may not talk about it as much as we want to, but I think that that's a big reason why a lot of the parents keep coming back, is because they're doing it with their son or daughter, and they're able to still be a part of it. Now, at a certain point in professional development, you have to back off and change that. Right. And one thing we're trying to work on actively this year is finding a way to organize some sort of infrastructure to where if someone wanted to try a performance kart before they buy it, that's something we're trying to set up an infrastructure for. But I think as a whole, at least CKT, from our perspective, I think we've really tried to focus on explaining the value of the sport first and foremost so that people kind of get that. Because I think once people understand that, that is really a big way for them to stay engaged with it and kind of believe that all the money and time they're spending is really worth it.
Yeah, I think
I love what... Sorry, James.
No, go ahead.
I love what you said about just how it's a family experience.
It is.
It's such an awesome bonding experience, and I'm very fortunate to have spent so much time at the track with my dad, and then now with my daughter. It's fantastic. I'm sure you guys saw what John said about getting karts out there in parades and stuff. That's an awesome idea. I know I've seen at other tracks where if you show up and you're driving a rental cart and you show a little more interest on the competitive side, they'll have a couple carts laying around, and if you show enough interest, they'll be like, yeah, absolutely, have your kid jump in this kid cart, or here, you jump in a 206 or something like that. And that's when you're really going to whet their appetite.
Absolutely. And I think, Dustin, you touch on the idea of working with schools and ski teams and clubs in Colorado, and then also being in those parades. That's something that we've done and definitely gotten a lot of positive respect and attitude from people. One thing we did, there's a town kind of southeast of Denver called Parker, so we participated in Parker Days last year, and we got a ton of interaction from people that would never have seen a go-kart except for at that event. But the trick is I think at this point you kind of have to pitch karting, and it has to be in an environment where people are already kind of interested in motorsports, because one thing we found, interestingly, is we got a ton of interaction and a lot of people interested in it. We would show them flyers or videos or pictures at this event, and they seemed interested at the beginning, but that follow-up wasn't really there. So that there's still a bridge between them thinking, oh, this is really cool, and oh, this is really for me. And I think so. At a certain point, there's a lot of people that if you aren't kind of already in that car-oriented mindset, there's still that challenge of understanding the culture and really why karting versus Pop Warner football or NHL hockey or something like that. That I think as a whole, the karting industry as a whole really needs to think about that. I think culturally, to really touch on something initially when you brought this up, every kart racer needs to be more of an advocate for their own sport. I think together, if we can work on that and focus on that, a lot more difference could be made than one person being responsible for putting out some snazzy video or focusing in their region on growing it. But that was actually one thing I wanted to ask you, Wright, was you obviously have this experience on the motorsports production TV side and media side, as well as other sports. What would you say is the difference in how a major professional broadcast of motorsports is conducted versus, for example, going to the Olympics in the coming months? What would you say is difference in terms of the type of viewer that's watching, and kind of the value proposition that you're putting forward to a motorsports person or someone that's predispositioned to get involved in karting versus bobsled or figure skating or something like that for their son or daughter?
All excellent pieces of the puzzle, and it's a tangled web we weave. We may have to wade our way through all that. I would say I was going to say about the kids getting involved in the sport, and especially the expense. Having gone through a lot of that myself, I got all the way up to Pro Formula Super V back in 1988, so I was one step below Indy cars. So I've seen that level of it, and then now I'm at the grassroots karting level. And I think when you're talking about, like, for example, kids playing soccer or basketball, obviously there's not a huge expense, but there's an expense there. As they get older and start playing competitive sports, you get the club teams involved, and then things start getting a little pricier. They start traveling, things like that. I think you can compare pretty positively karting and a football. Hockey, I hear, is really expensive because there's a lot of travel involved and ice time and renting the rinks and things like that. So I would say karting at the grassroots level is pretty comparative there. Going into the entertainment side of it, I was fortunate. I was telling James earlier, I was fortunate enough to put together the entire production of the '07 Grand Nationals at the track at Centennial. That was pretty much my original foray into competitive karting. Obviously, I had been around motorsports my whole life, raced cars, raced motorcycles, whatever. But I didn't know that much about karting. And then all of a sudden, we've got this awesome track, like right in the heart of Denver with really easy access. Got to be friends with the owner. He knew that I worked for a sports network here in Denver at the time. One thing led to another, and we put together the whole production. I think we had 7 or 8 cameras for that production. We had a big TV truck. We were there for at least 3 days, and I think we covered all the finals live. So
Nice.
it was. I'm sure you could find some of that footage out there somewhere on YouTube or whatever. And from that, we went on to televise a couple other events. We did a street course down at Pepsi Center. We did another local event out at Centennial. But those are you talk about, like, kind of CKTV and the grassroots karting level. Those were kind of the grassroots productions that I've done, and they're a lot of fun. I've also done some smaller races, like up at Colorado National Speedway. The smaller bull rings are so fun, and it's just you get your buddies together and you hammer this thing out, and you're all working your butt off, and there's all these little problems that you don't even think about. Trying to get timing and scoring embedded into the score strip so you can show everybody what the running order is. Just little things like that. I can remember a race up at Colorado National one time, and literally I needed to get a commercial break in. So I, I talked to the chief steward on headset, and I said, "Can you throw a yellow, please? I need to get a commercial in." So they did. They threw a yellow for me.
Wow.
Um, and then you compare stuff like that to I've worked the Indy 500 I think 11 times now, and that is a ginormous production. The NASCAR productions I've worked for NBC and ESPN are huge. Everybody shows up about a week before the race to start setting everything up and doing interviews and building graphics and building highlight packages and just getting all the infrastructure set up and working properly and talking to everything. That's the key. I leave Wednesday for Korea to do the Olympics for NBC, where I'm going to be covering alpine skiing. So I'll be over there for 23 days. We don't even have our first event until the 11th of February, so we'll have 9 days just to set everything up.
Right.
And again, that's just the alpine skiing events. You've got 5 or 6 other venues where a bunch of other sports are going on. So it's quite a logistical feat to put all that stuff together. But the entire landscape, as I'm sure you guys know, of cable television is changing a lot. The cable cutter uh, era has definitely hit us. We got rid of cable about a year ago. So how does that affect live sports programming? It seems like people are still going to want to watch live sports. It's just a matter of how they consume it. That seems to be the big question in the air, and I'm sure you guys have some opinions on that thought, especially with a niche sport like karting.
Yeah, James, I'm curious to see your thought. I know you've talked to so many people in the industry over the last few years. Certainly in the last 10 years, I've seen the sport shift quite dramatically. And I'll touch on my thought that I think actually video in particular, broadcast productions have played in that, but I'm curious to see what you think, James.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we
There
may
we
not
go.
be getting audio, James. I don't know if you can hear us.
Apparently, I have to unmute myself before I talk. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, so I just said that like anything, it can be good and it can be bad. I guess it really depends on how it's executed. I think what's pretty interesting nowadays is that it's easier than ever, of course, to run some sort of broadcast, but at the same time, so is everybody else. So how do you construct something that breaks through the noise, or at least breaks through the noise and reaches the right people that you want to reach? So we're in a really interesting time in terms of media landscape right now. And I think, certainly for kart racing, most TV deals, I would say when you do the ROI, it depends on what your goal is, but generally speaking, if you're thinking about the ROI in terms of attracting new racers, I mean, one, it's difficult to measure. Two, I'd say it's probably going to be pretty small. Because the first thing folks are going to do is they're going to try and find out more, and they're going to come across some issues right there. And so I think, when a lot of the time this comes up where we'll say, or folks will say, we need more TV coverage or we need more exposure. And really what we need to do is kind of get ourselves in order so that people have the information they need when they want to take action. There's no point in attracting people to something unless they could take the next steps. And there's some exceptions to that, depends on how it's done. But I think what's great about social media now is that you can produce some high content video or high quality content video and present it to the right people that are most likely to engage with it. Whereas traditional media is a bit more of casting a net very wide and not being able to really know what the reaction is going to be. But I think Supercars USA have been doing the TV thing with, I think it's CBS Sports. Is that correct? NBC Sports.
CBS, I think.
CBS.
Yeah.
It's a something S. And it's a great production and it looks fantastic. But really, I think the best way to look at that, and ultimately it's up to school side as well. But I think really the main benefit of that is that it's a value add to the racers in that series. I don't think you're necessarily going to see an influx of kart racers for various reasons. But one of them being that, you know, it is still difficult to get started unless you connect with the right people at the right time, or if you connect with the right website or connect, you know, it's still kind of cliquey like that. But otherwise, you know, if we can craft the correct message and get it in front of the right people, I think that's really where the challenge is. Instead of, you know, another thing that I've been talking with David Klaus about a lot recently too is that rather than, well, there's two things I see happening a lot. One is there's a lot of talk of trying to make the sport even cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I think we run the risk of bringing ourselves to a point where it won't be sustainable to run a club or a track, or at least run it and promote it effectively and have a marketing budget, or, you know, do the things that we need to do. My thought is, especially when it comes to like the Briggs 206 package, is you know, basically reverse engineer a current demographic of people that are interested in it and go find more people like that. You know, that makes more sense to me rather than it's too expensive, people aren't racing because it's expensive. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but really that's not the issue. I think there's like 2,600 drivers registered in the Briggs Weekly Racing Series. So, you know, that's a good place to start, right? That's got
Absolutely.
good traction. So, yeah, I mean, it's really just, you know, in terms of our content, figuring out what the values are for those racers and presenting that in front of more of those kind of people, you know. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think we just got a very timely comment from Jake Reel, who has the Rags to Races podcast. Going back to what was said before, we as kart racers need to be the exposure for the sport. We can use social media and GoPro footage to help bring the sport to people who would otherwise not organically find karting. I think more than any other media, if you look at other sports that started around roughly the same time as karting and have grown exponentially more than that, you know, one I use a lot with James is motocross. You see that use of the people in the sport, and you also see a lot of video use, right? And that's what drives a lot of engagement with it. But that's not all of it. People are in their neighborhoods actively working on their bike or cleaning it out front of their house, and the 5-year-old walks by and sees that, and her eyes get really big, and they say, oh, I want that, right? And it's the same probably in your neighborhood, right? So there's a balance here. But one thing that I think, James, you touched on that's interesting is I think a broadcast that is professionally done, either like what you did, Wright, at the Rotax Grand Finals, or the CBS Sports Spectacular now that we have for SCUSA, is great for the sport in terms of it puts it in front of new eyeballs, but it also presents a challenge in terms of kind of who's going to then go and get involved in karting. And you may have a different opinion on this than I have, but I think a lot of people in the sport have seen a very pivotal shift in terms of how a lot of local kart shops approach their business model in karting. And I think, in my opinion, one of the biggest reasons of that is the advent of a lot more of these professional productions at the national level, rather than presenting the sport at a variety of different levels, where all of a sudden we see these new people coming into the sport from a CBS broadcast saying, oh, my son or daughter can be famous or compete at the SCUSA level. And suddenly you see the karting shops reacting to that and now catering to 5 or 6 clients rather than their local region, right? So even though they'll be based in Colorado or they'll be based in Southern California, they're racing in Florida. And so that's one of the, I think, unforeseen impacts that a TV broadcast has had. It's taken the local kind of element of karting and made it harder for that to be something that is as prevalent. Now, I think if you look at other broadcasts where you go to these local events that would not normally get the TV coverage, and then you do something like that, it brings karting in front of a wider audience, I think, that doesn't necessarily have that same appeal. But yeah, I think James is also right. If you try to make 206 even cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, or karting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, it does make the local events really struggle to make kind of the basics just to stay afloat. But I'm curious to see what you think an event like covering that Rotax Grand Finals, do you think that had a long-lasting impact on driving value for kart racers kind of nationwide, or do you think it was a great coverage of the people that were in that event specifically, but didn't add as much as, say, other karters just going out into the public, going to Cars and Coffee, things like that, that aren't on TV. Which one do you think is more valuable, right?
Excellent points. I think to use that '07 Grands production as an example, and I'm pretty sure that this is how the Supernats works as well. The Track and Centennial came to us. They paid for the production and basically did a time buy on our regional sports network to air that coverage. Now, I think what you were kind of getting at is where probably a bigger benefit was like making DVDs for all the drivers. I think the track sold some DVDs of that telecast. And again, I think I have a feeling the SCUSA situation is similar with the Supernats. They probably paid a production company to come in and do that production. They bought time on CBS Sports, hoping, and again, this is James's point, that this was their goal, hoping to expose this and get some new people involved because they just happened to be flipping the channel and saw go-kart racing on, or I mean, obviously it's a great benefit to all the people that are involved in that particular race. But I think at the end of the day, the goal is to get new eyeballs on the sport and get more people involved. And obviously, SCUSA's got a bunch of sponsors. Speaking of which, Polidori Sausage, my sponsor. You can find it at King Soopers, Safeway, Whole Foods. You can get it all over Colorado. It's great stuff. Obviously, SCUSA's trying to make their sponsors happy, and that's why they probably wanted to get into that whole the airing of the Super Nationals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What was the name of the sausage again? I don't want to just say Wright sausage.
So it was the event.
What was that again?
Uh-oh.
I was plugging the sponsor.
I think that's our first sponsorship plug on the KT Live show. So that's good. Polidori Sausage, go out and get some. If you have a Safeway, a Vaughn's, King Soopers near you, go out, support KP, support Wright.
There you go.
And all the things he likes. Sausage is always good.
How do I spell it correctly?
Right.
Polodori?
Yes. A great story. I'm friends with one of the owners, so that helps a lot. But oldest sausage company in Colorado was started by my buddy Steve Polidori's grandfather, basically just in a garage. And then they opened up a little Italian deli in downtown Denver. And they've been going ever since. They just opened up a real big processing plant out at the old Stapleton Airport grounds, and they're going gangbusters. And they've been great in helping me and my daughter's karting careers. They've been very helpful. Funny side note: at one point, I had a tequila sponsor as well. This stuff, Arta Tequila, which is fantastic. But when I kind of closed the deal on that one, my daughter said to me, she was 16 at the time, she said, "Hey, Dad, don't you think Mom's going to be mad that I'm sponsored by a tequila company?" I said, "Don't worry about it. As long as they're paying the bills, she'll be fine with it."
I think, some of our racers may recognize the name Jason Bowles. He said, I don't care who the sponsor is. If my car is pink and says Barbie all across it, I will still race it because that means I'm on the track and racing. So I think to a certain extent, there's definitely, you can't be too picky when it comes to the sponsors you recruit in racing. But switching gears a little bit, Wild Duck Racing also asked, Wright, I think this is a good question for you. How does carrying on a broadcast at Road America, a road course, that's much longer or more spread out than, say an oval like Iowa Speedway or something like that? How does that differ in terms of the staffing challenges and the challenges from commentating and switching between all the cameras and really showing both the visual and then the auditory product that you're trying to convey? What's the biggest challenge there?
Well, Wild Duck Racing. I love the name. That's fantastic. And a great question. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in kart, Champ Car, IndyCar productions for almost 20 years now. I've been involved with IMSA for about the last 10 years, and I've done a lot of NASCAR as well. And I've been lucky enough to race at Road America a couple times myself. If you've never been there, go there this summer for the IMSA or the IndyCar race. It's fantastic. Elkhart Lake's a really cool little town as well. As far as the question is concerned, it's basically just a matter of time and resources. So for Road America example, I think we have 16 cameras total going all the way around the track, including a couple handheld cameras in the pits. All those cameras need cable, need fiber cable going to them to carry the signal back to the TV truck, which is parked just on the opposite side of the pits at Road America. So you've got literally miles of fiber cable coming from all the different cameras around the track to the TV truck. Then you include all the audio cables because you obviously want to be able to hear the cars going around the track. There's microphones on every camera, but then there's a lot big spaces in between the cameras. So you've got to put microphones in those spaces. So all that has to come back to the TV truck. So just as an example, for Road America, I think our fiber crew goes in literally the weekend before the race. So probably 7 or 8 days before we even go on the air. And they'll start laying down cable. And then probably 3 days after that, we'll start building cameras and then start getting into more of the pre-production work. Whereas with an oval, obviously you've got a lot less cameras and therefore it's less setup time, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that definitely answers the question of the logistics and kind of the manpower and all of the layout of the cameras. One component that I think that question also touched on was almost the commentating. Once you have all the infrastructure set up for both of them, is there a certain style or a certain number of staff that you need to really tell what's going on at a Road America versus an oval? Or would you say that the same principles apply whether it's on an oval or on a road course, just dependent on the size of the venue? Do you think the same key players are there to announce, the same things matter, that sort of thing?
Pretty much the same, yes, same announcers, etc. I know a few years back, I think it was ESPN or TNT, when they would cover some of the NASCAR road courses, they would put announcers out on the track, like out at one of the turns, about halfway around the lap. And I know they tried doing it that way. I know when they do radio, and I think IndyCar still does this. I think it's on the IndyCar radio network. I think they have announcers actually out on the track at some of the bigger venues. But as far as the regular commentators, it's pretty much status quo. I will say that covering an oval, especially a bull ring, like a short track, half mile, 5/8, even the mile tracks, especially with IndyCar, man, stuff happens so fast. The cars get into lap traffic really quick. You can easily lose track of where everybody is. So I would say it's probably more difficult than a longer road course such as like Elkhart, which is almost 4 miles long.
I think that's a really good point. And, one thing I've heard, and maybe you can comment on this a little bit, is I think even the professional broadcasts in motorsports are switching more to kind of a remote broadcasting role, right? So they'll have a really professional studio set up in one place, and they'll set up that skeleton of infrastructure for the cameras, but the actual crew that's commentating on it may not always be at the actual track. They may not be in a corner. They may be back in North Carolina or wherever the broadcast headquarters is, in an air-conditioned room or in an RV where they literally can't see outside. So their only way to announce and commentate on it is through those video feeds that they get. So I would imagine that having that flexibility frees up a little bit of money to be able to put extra cameras here or there, or kind of leverage your budget to show the product in a little bit of a different way. Do you think that that's a model that realistically a local karting series could do, to say they wanted to do something like what we're doing today, a Facebook Live event? Do you think that there's kind of a bare minimum standard, kind of setting your professional broadcasting hat aside, that it is necessary to really be able to represent a kart race to someone on the internet looking through a screen, in terms of the number of cameras, or that there has to be an announcer? Or do you think that even if a local kart racing series just set up one camera, kind of pointed down the straightaway with no commentary because that's all they can afford, do you think that's enough to get people online interested in the sport? Or do you think that that's almost worse than doing nothing?
No, I absolutely think that that helps. And I've seen it before. I remember watching one of the Gators races, I think, out in Sonoma, and it was raining like heck, and I think they had one camera. But you know, to those of us who are really into the sport, we're going to watch it. I don't necessarily think you need an announcer, but you probably need some kind of timing and scoring input there. But yeah, I think for these smaller niche sports, and I would definitely say this is where karting needs to go, or do more of, some of these smaller podcasts, broadcasts, webcasts, whatever you want to call it, streaming. That's certainly the way of the future. You touched on the fact that even with the bigger racing, and this is going on with IMSA. All the commentators, all the replays, all the graphics, a lot of that stuff is back in a studio in Charlotte, North Carolina. And really the only people on site are the camera people, and the pit reporters. Last year, I was working the Daytona 24. This year, I'm not working it because they changed up that infrastructure. And it's the way of the world, more with less. Obviously, like you were saying, freeing up some budget. If they can make the productions a little cheaper, hopefully we can get more content on the air. And James and I touched on it a little bit, or briefly, at the very beginning, just the cable cutters and what that means to all sports. As you guys probably know, I mean, F1 is completely changing their platform and going to more of a streaming pay-per-view kind of thing, and that's the way I see pretty much all sports going in the future, except for the really big stuff, of course, NFL, etc.
That's interesting that you bring that up. James, what do you think about, do you think more local kart races should make an attempt to do something like this Facebook Live? Do you think that is a viable way for them to reach, from a social media perspective or just a broadcasting perspective, local people? It's a way to show grandma their son racing, or their grandson racing in the local kart race. It's a way for them to tune in and engage with it. Or do you think that even now that we have the technology, that we're not quite ready to do that? What's your thought?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you're muted again, James.
Take two. Honestly, from what I've seen, I've monitored a lot of different attempts to kind of do the Facebook Live thing from the track. Really, to do it to a level where I think people are going to tune in, it takes a bit of effort. You've got to have something, because again, it's going to be flashing by people's Facebook newsfeed, so it's got to really, really capture people's attention. And that means that it needs to be really well thought out and really well optimized. Otherwise, you're just going to catch the same group of people, I think. And that's what I've observed too. Some of the clubs that I've worked with, we've done a little bit of Facebook Live stuff. Really, for it to reach a larger audience, there needs to be, like anything, there needs to be some sort of exclusivity or something out of the ordinary about it. For example, ordinarily you would say that a single camera with somebody who's doing commentary would not do well. And when I've done that for smaller clubs, it really hasn't. But then when I was in the middle of the track in Vegas with the Super Nationals, just standing there with a single camera, 41,000 people saw it. So it it depends on how much demand, pent up demand there is, and how that video is presented. But most clubs are in a tough position. Although it's easy to get out on social media to use it effectively, it's challenging. It's not easy because the competition and the standards have increased hugely, especially since 2011. The days of just reaching a bunch of people that are not interested in your content are gone. You got to put a lot of focus and a lot of work into it to optimize it for that platform. And then if you want to take it to the next step, you're going to make sure you're reaching the right people with it too. So there's lots of opportunities, but like anything, all opportunities are disguised as hard work. But I would encourage, I think the most important thing about anything technology related these days, or anything media related, is to just keep experimenting. There really are no hard and fast rules. Like I said, you could say that one camera on the track would suck, and most of the time it does. Sometimes it works. It really depends on what your creativity and your imagination is going to be like. At the very least, I'd say if you're going to do something like that, please buy a tripod. Just please. They're like $26 at Walmart, so that's going to be my plea to people. Good point. Buy a cheapy tripod. They usually come with little phone bracket. You pop your cell phone on it, and away you go. Be willing to experiment, and I mean that's kind of what the KartPulse Facebook page has been about. Last year, I think we reached 6.4 million people, and it's all through different experimentation of the kinds of content and how we deliver it, and just trying different things, and a lot of the time going against their assumption and going against logic, and just seeing what works for us and what works for our audience.
Yeah, I think that's one you touched on, getting the tripod. It always amazes me. Some of the videos, you go to CNN or something and they say, "Oh, we have an eyewitness news and it's live on the scene," and it's this shaky, pixelated 8-bit video that of course, at the middle of a traumatic event, it must be different. But it's always amazes you. People joke about how hard it is just to keep the camera kind of in one spot. So, yes, please invest in a tripod if you're going to do something like that. Yeah. Jake Reel says, I think that bigger events like Rock Island and such really need to have a bigger presence with video. Something that is fairly low cost entry. Broadcast can reach more people.
The challenge with that, though, is really it's not low cost to entry. It's really not. Mm-hmm. I mean, access to the platform, the streaming platform, is essentially free. But to make a production worthy of actually reaching anybody, it's exactly the same as what Wright described earlier, where you've got multiple cameras, maybe fiber, but you could get away with some internet-based stuff. But there's a lot of work and a lot of coordination. The internet part is the easy part. You still have to make a production. But again, to be fair to what Jake is saying too, with some events, a little goes a long way. Last year at Rock Island, a couple of guys just did some Facebook Live stuff on their personal feeds, and that went great because in the absence of anything else, at that event, it was unique enough people wanted to watch it. But I did that thing at the Super Nationals again. At that point, there was no other live stuff going on. It was just me with a microphone and a funny accent talking for 2 hours. And people tuned in and people digged it. So, but I've seen a couple of tracks try and do the multi-camera thing, and to do it right in a way that's going to really engage people is very difficult. And it's expensive. You've got to have the right cameras, and you've got to have the right people and the right talent to run it. That part hasn't changed, and it's probably not going to. It's just the nature of the beast of running a production. It's not something that can be automated, and I love automation. I'm into AI and all that stuff, and that's some of my background, but this is not something that can be automated. But we could definitely do a lot more. I think it's fair to say that.
Yeah, I think there's almost two different kind of groups that you can reach, right? For an event like the Rock Island Grand Prix or the Super Nationals, you've got a lot of people that are sitting in their cubicle at work or at home, and yeah, they can't watch the race live because those might be tape delay events, or they can follow the EKN event. But there's so many people that really would take even the minimal grainy cell phone just so they could see the event, right? That those people are really eager to see you. But then you also have the other component of the people that are not sold on karting yet, or that haven't seen it before. And if you present them something that isn't a really outstanding or at least adequate production, right, that reflects not just on their understanding of the sport because they've seen it live, but just the sport in general. So you've almost got two different groups, one of which kind of has this almost glass ceiling, right? For example, the group of us that are aware of the Rock Island Grand Prix, but not necessarily watch it live or go to it live. If there was a Facebook Live, we would tune in and we would watch it, and we would probably be a little more flexible with the production quality than someone that would never watch a kart race otherwise. But if it's at an acceptable production level and it's high quality and there's commentators to help make sense of it, that they can engage with it. So there's almost two different groups there, which makes me think that that first group is addressable, even if you only have one camera or you have it live, because every single person that goes to the kart track has a family, right, that is rooting for them and that cares about them, can't necessarily be there. So for them, I think it makes a lot of sense. But if you really want that sport to attract people, or that video to attract people, you have to have maybe those multiple cameras or something that is going to be a cool production that makes the sport look as much like it does in real life as it does on camera. So I almost wish there was a way for, say, when Rob Howden goes to an event and you have his great commentary that he matched it with some video, even a small bit. I think that would really take that to another level.
Yeah, I've seen that done a couple of times where people took like their onboards, and I think EKN added Rob Howden's voice. Say somebody starting at the back of the grid, working their way through the field and stuff.
That's right. Yeah,
I think that's worked quite well. Yeah, dub. There you go. Yeah, that's the right term for it. But I just put up the title there, "Social Media Dichotomy for Karting," and that's really what it is.
Dichotomy, good word.
Yeah, there's so much talk about you should be on social media, you could do this, you should do that. But at the same time, it has to be done a certain way. But that certain way is not a clear path. It's going to vary by page and the resources available to you. Really, that's what it comes down to.
Well, let me throw out a hypothetical. Do you think if you had a minimal production, let's say 2 or 3 cameras with an announcer, with timing and scoring, and you're streaming it live, do you think there would be some pay-per-view interest from folks, even if you're only paying like $3 to watch it? You think there's a market out there for something like that?
I don't think so. What do you think?
I think there is, but I think it's probably not enough to really make a lot of money off of it. And I say that not because it's not been tried before. There are similar events like that. One great example, actually at a national level, would be MAV TV. I don't know if you have much experience with that channel, but after Speed Channel kind of went defunct, MAV TV moved in and said, hey, we're going to be this grassroots motorsports TV channel. And they did okay for a little while, and eventually they struggled, and they're still making it along, but they're trying this pay-per-view subscription route. And what's resulted is they've had to not just do these pay-per-view subscriptions for motorsports events, they have to kind of do the reality show route too. So they have to fill airtime as they go. Other attempts for just strictly that pay-per-view event, one's called Dirt Vision, another one's called Loud Pedal TV Production, all of that stuff, which has that pairing with the announcement and is kind of at a minimal level for production value. They do okay when it comes to that subscription amount, but they're not... It's still a pretty hard value proposition, and they really can't price it that low at $3 because they don't have the audience for it. So they have to charge a little more per viewer, which, right, of course, is a really big hurdle right away. But something like that isn't without precedent. I would say at the local level, it would be pretty hard to do the pay-per-view model, at least initially. That's my suspicion.
Right. Yeah. I guess I was just thinking out loud and trying to figure out a way for the organizers to make a couple bucks, especially if they're putting an initial investment into the production. And something like that really isn't going to cost much. You've got to find the right person who obviously loves the sport and is willing to put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in it, just to make it happen. But really, two or three cameras, it's not hard. As I'm sure James knows, it sounds like you're pretty familiar with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I've done some at karting, and then I actually used to do a lot of live broadcasts of surgeries, open heart surgeries and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I cut my live broadcasting teeth.
Oh
But
my
yeah, I've
God.
always been into it was, seeing a surgeon's hand live holding my heart is something a little bit different. But yeah, I always try and keep a if nothing else for the kind of nerdy geeky side of me, just keep myself interested in video. And I've always been interested in video and social media and how technology impacts things. But pay per view, I found, you know, it's been really hard to make a scale. I think probably maybe at best you would be looking at maybe some sort of a tiered model where there's some amount of free value to get people engaged, and then something that's value added on top of that. I think that might work. But I think you know, don't quote me on this, but you know, I think usually the most concurrent viewers you'll get for some of the biggest events in karting are, let's say, 400. I think the most I've ever observed for an audio stream was in 2009 for the Super Nationals when Michael Schumacher was racing. And that was a little over 1,000. So if we think of 1,000 people tuning in, not paying, how many of those will convert to pay-per-view? I don't know. But, I mean, there is something to be said for the content, too. You know, that was just an audio stream. But nowadays, it's a tough one. You know, this has kind of been the challenge for me with KartPulse too, is trying to figure out things that will scale, because it is a very niche sport. You know, it's in the US, you know, it's a niche within a niche within a niche within a niche, and that's before you even get down to the different kinds of kart racing. So, I mean, that's what's been an interesting challenge about it. But, you know, I think there was some talk a couple of years ago about trying to do a pay-per-view for the Super Nationals, and I think I even did a little bit of validation myself. And really, you know, when it comes to it, people will say they pay for it. When it comes down to it, they don't, and all those kind of things. But we did, you know, become one. The documentary, you know, to be fair, a lot of people did put their hands in their pockets and their money where their mouth is, and got behind that project. And I thought that was pretty awesome to see the karting community pull together for that.
I think touching on something we commented earlier on, you mentioned kind of the astronomical view count that you had with a KartPulse broadcast at the Super Nationals or a Rock Island GP event. I think one of those events where there isn't anything existing, but there's so many people in karting that want to watch the event that aren't there, that there's already that ready-made audience. I think then a pay-per-view audience makes sense. But I think putting up a pay-per-view paywall and then asking people to come watch, I think if they haven't heard about karting or they haven't interacted with it before, that's where I think it doesn't really work. So I think if you have a built-in audience that you can at least start with, that's where that might work, and that engagement might work.
I think gears, you know, well, just quickly, I'm thinking of like probably one of the biggest, most star-studded karting events, and that's I can't pronounce it, but it's in Brazil, big race in Brazil where I have
the Granja Viana. Yeah, that would make sense too.
And well, yeah, but then, you know, do we think people do a pay-per-view for there? I don't know. I think it's probably more to do with sponsors, and then of course working with them to make sure that they get good value on what they're investing into, and I think that's probably as good an opportunity as any. But we'll go ahead and switch gears.
Those two guys were beating the crap out of each other earlier this year.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? Apparently, you know, one of those drivers was on a team that Felipe Massa, the new CIK-FIA president, is involved in.
Oops.
Yeah, so he got a lot of negative press for that somehow, even though I'd argue he wasn't really related in it. But that was that same event. It's been going on for well over 10 years. Yeah, so you see a lot of Formula One drivers and Brazilian sports car drivers and things like that take part in it. Rubens Barrichello, Tony Kanaan, people like that. And usually there's either a scholarship or some sort of award for an American to go over there. So over the years, it's been a consistent event. I think this year Gary Carlton was on the winning team. They were running either second or third, and then that team was the team that got in the tussle was either running first or second and got in a fight. So then they got disqualified. But that would be another event that even in the U.S. people know about because they've read about it in a magazine or they've heard about it. So I think their pay-per-view could make sense. I'd be interested to see what our viewers think if the Super Nats went to a pay-per-view format so that they didn't have to wait for a week to watch it on CBS? Would you tune in and would you pay the $5 to watch the Supernats or to watch the Chili Bowl or watch the Granjaviana or an event like that where you know about it and you obviously would like to be there live, but for work or whatever reason, would you tune in? Would you watch it? Dustin Wayman commented about this weekend, timely event, the Rock Challenge of the Americas. Right, I don't know how much you've been following that, but it's in Phoenix at PKRA right now. He's wondering what we think about the turnout for this event, and do we think it will gain strength and competitors as the season goes on? Right, have you been following that event at all?
Not that much, other than I know there's a few Coloradans who made the journey down there, and I hope they had a successful weekend. That would definitely lead me to the whole conversation about tag motors and what's going on in that arena. But I always wish the best for any series, and was fortunate enough to drive a Rock a couple weeks ago for the first time, and that is an awesome motor.
It is. It has gotten either neutral or favorable reviews from a lot of people. I got involved in karting at a time when Vortex was kind of another word for time bomb. I think they came out with the original Rock, and those had some problems. But everything we've heard so far is that people are kind of waiting and seeing what they think of that engine. In terms of the attendance. From what I've seen on Race Monitor and from what I've heard from friends, it sounds like it's an okay turnout for a regional event. I think at this point, I wouldn't say I would put Challenge of the Americas on the same level as the SCUSA Pro Tour in terms of maybe prestige or entries or participation. But I don't think nationwide there's a lot of events like that. So certainly it's a legitimate regional event. You've got people from different states coming. You've got people in these larger tents. And I think those are ways to kind of judge if that's that sort of event. I think the turnout is actually surprisingly good. I would just be curious to see long-term if that grows or if it stays about the same. One thing that I think might be a slight misconception is, yes, it is the Rock package, but the Challenge of the Americas has been around for several years. So it's not a new series. The management that's involved with it and the way they conduct the series isn't anything new to people. So it's not the first event for this series that's never existed. So I think it's hard to say if it'll really grow or stay about the same, because the turnout that we saw this weekend, I would say, is on par with what we've seen in previous years where the Rotax was the primary engine package, although at times it was a little larger. My hope, just like you, right, is I don't really wish it bad on any series. I want to see them all be successful. The more people that are at a Rock event, the more people that can be at a local event, hopefully. Sonoma is in Northern California, which is more in the backyard of some of the teams. So maybe we'll see a little more participation, but it is a little further away for, the Colorado contingent. So I guess we'll see week to week or month to month. I know I wish that they did more events personally. I think it's only 4 that they have this year or something like that. I wish they had more events at that regional level. But I think time will tell on whether or not it really grows or stays about the same.
Well, we've seen this in motorsports for so long, whether it's, the easiest one to look at is kart and IRL. When you've got 2 big series, it almost like they're fighting against each other, especially in this day and age when there's only so many motorsports fans out there. So I hope that they're wise in that they're not hurting each other. I guess one of my questions for you guys, because I don't really get a feel for what karting is like around the rest of the country. With Rotax, kind of seems like they're on the decline. Do you feel like most of those people are going over to a Rock? Have they gone over to the SCUSA side, or is it even?
James, what do you think?
Well, I don't really have any numbers. My sense is, leading probably more towards IAME and SCUSA. But the biggest problem is there's just not enough racers up at that level right now in the sport with that budget. and we've got at least two groups that have well-run races, well-promoted races, good engine packages with good parity, that are, you know, effectively fighting for, you know, the same 300-400 drivers, and it has been that way for a while. You know, for a while it was max speed, you know, went under and stopped operating, and I think honestly, when we talk about Rotax, from an outside perspective, for me, it looked like max speed themselves were doing a great job, and they kind of got hosed by Rotax. And I might make somebody angry by saying that, but really, you know, how the Evo thing was handled from a marketing and technical perspective, it did not go well, and it you know, it really, again, my outside perspective, it looked like it really hurt max speed because they were so tied to that package, and you know, in a way, it's a shame because we lost a really good promoter for the sport to put on some really good events. But on the other hand, we now have, you know, Rock has you know, come more, Vortex's products have come more to the fore. You know, competition is good, but you know, we at that level we haven't reached critical mass. You know, we still need more racers at that level, I think, to make those two flourish. So there's, you know, I think there's definitely still a scarcity mindset. There's a lot on the line, and they're putting a lot of money into these events to make them happen. You know, when you look at especially the likes of the Super Nationals, and we've got both of these series now running a race in Las Vegas. I think they're both at the Rio within a week of each other this year, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's kind of crazy. It's the double-edged sword of the free market. You know,
yeah.
What can you say?
And I'm all for competition, and I'm all for having multiple series, but I think, you know, the kart versus IRL kind of thing, you see it at different levels in motorsport, and you see it not just in karting or not just in professional racing. You see it in all forms. When you have two kind of semi, you know, say you want to call them B-class giants going head-to-head, whereas if they work together, even though that may not make them individually as much money or may not fulfill their egos, they could be that much bigger, right? So if those two decide to just butt heads over and over and over, eventually it'll really drive them both down. But if they both kind of have this gentleman's agreement to try to work with each other, then they can coexist. And depending on who's managing or even which way the wind's blowing, I think that can change from day to day. The interesting thing about the Rotax, I think, James, you're right, and it certainly went through a phase where and maybe rightly so, where for a number of reasons it wasn't as popular, or people felt like they were not getting the same value at that national level, or that they couldn't compete. I would comment, in fairness to Rotax or Max Speed, that's not been unique to them. It's not like they were the first ones to ever have that issue when they've tried to have a spec series. My impression, though, is I think Rotax at the moment is lying low a little bit. Regardless of how they've gotten there, the current Evo package, I've heard, is pretty well sorted out and actually a pretty reliable package. So I think if Rotax ever decided they wanted to get back into karting and find another equivalent of Max Speed, that they really could jump in and within a relatively short amount of time be back where Rotax has been for a long time, which is with a rich karting history. You know, so many people, I think, maybe forget that Rotax is one of the longest tenured brands in karting. And so I really don't think it's going to go away completely. I think at the moment it may not be the flavor of the week, but I'm skeptical that it'll really ever fade out. I know locally there are so many people that have a Rotax engine that we're going to keep racing Rotaxes because people have them in their garage and because, at least at the local level, they're feasible to race. Yeah, Wright is one of them. So, you know, one thing James has pointed out to me, and I think is important for people to keep in mind, is just because the very tippy top of the pyramid is racing a certain engine package or is a certain way, doesn't mean that that's representative of karting as a whole. And, you know, right this moment, Rotax or someone at Rotax may be thinking about how to break back into the U.S. karting market or the national market. So when I hear people saying, oh, Rotax is dead or Rotax is garbage, I kind of roll my eyes because I think if you look right in front of your nose, maybe that's true. But I think long term, it's I think they'll be back, is my suspicion.
Yeah, they're going to have to change course communication-wise in the U.S., though, because it seems like there isn't a broad sense of what the future of Rotax is going to be here. And at least from my perspective, most of the information I've gotten, which was not very useful, but it was, you know, floating over from Europe. And I think, you know, the most popular thing about road techs that has been talked about recently is their electric car. And, you know, that's a little ironic after about 20 years of the FR125. But, yeah, I think it's unfortunate. You know, driving the road tax package, for me, I never really cared for it. But I always, you know, I always respected its mission and what they tried to do. At least they tried to bring in parity. And then I think towards the end, as things went on, that became more difficult to attain. Depending on who you believe, I think it's a fair point to say that you know, parity is a challenge for all series and all engines. But I think road tax, whether it's perception or reality, I think there's definitely a reputation in the past of a much larger discrepancy, I think, than I've seen in the past. And I think, I honestly, in my opinion, you know, their biggest challenges were just communication and marketing. And that's not max speed, but Rotax themselves, again, with how Evo was not announced, compounded the technical challenges that they had, compounded the fact that they tried to address the challenges, and compounded the fact that they then tried to address the cylinders, and, you know, it just cascaded from there. It's a real shame, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But, you know, really, right now in the US, I mean, somebody needs to tell people who Rotax is, ideally somebody in Rotax, what to expect. And maybe they've got a secret mailing list, you know, but that's only, you know, it's only going to communicate with people already running Rotax. What if what if I'm not on your mailing list, or what if I'm interested in buying a Rotax? I mean, there's one at my track for sale for $800 right now. You know, I put that on for $800 and give it a go. Why not? So, you know, I think that's something that, you know, they need to address that before anything else. Because once they do that, then they can start to repair some of the damage that has been done to their reputation. Because there's definitely a lot of negative sentiment towards Rotax. And I feel kind of bad for them in a way, but again, I hope we see something from them, something solid, a structure, a roadmap, something from Rotax about, if you have a Rotax or you would like to race one, here's how you can do so in the US. And if maybe that's just club level for now, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, right. there's still plenty of them out there at club level, but I found in conversations with those folks that are running them, they're not really sure. They, you know, people that used to build their engines for them have said that, you know, they claim that they can't get parts, which to me doesn't really sound. I mean, I find it hard to believe that you cannot get Rotax parts. I don't believe that. It may be more effort than somebody might want to put in. But again, that speaks to the breakdown that we have right now with Rotax. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that was more than 2 cents. That was good stuff. You're right, Rotax needs to do something soon. Otherwise, they're going to lose any of the momentum that they've built the last, 10, 15 years. I can dispel that one rumor, though. You can get parts. I'm getting a motor worked on right now. So
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, there is stuff out there. On the flip side of that, I think IAME and Rock were really smart to do those trade-in programs last year. They smelled blood in the water, and rightly so. So that was smart, and hopefully that helps their series for sure.
Yeah, I think that they definitely. I would definitely. I think that phrase about smelling blood in the water is very much what, especially SCUSA has done over the last few years. They have very prudently and cunningly smelled blood in the water with a bunch of different things. If you look at their recent acquisition of the IKF, I would argue, is in that same vein.
Right. I meant to ask you about that.
You know, the positives or negatives of that we can talk about maybe at a later date once we've really seen the impact of that at some point. But SCUSA, I think, more than any other kind of karting industry member, has really been very cunning in how they've acquired things. And I don't think that that's cunning necessarily in a bad way. I think they're very intentional in how they're going about it. It'll be interesting to see what will happen with it. But regardless, that question about, and interesting thing about the electric karts.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. You know,
that's where we're all going, right?
Well, or are we? Because I think if you look at, if we zoom out from just karting to motorsports in general, obviously Formula E has been around for a few years now. And when that first started, a lot of people were not quite sure what to think of it. I remember being very anti-Formula E because I'm self-proclaimed and will admit I'm going to be this generation's equivalent of the person that is going to moan and cry about the automobile replacing the horse and buggy, right? You know, I enjoy internal combustion and all that. But I remember watching a Formula E race and thinking, you know what? This is actually not that bad. They sound a little bit like golf carts, but the racing's racing. So you see a lot of manufacturers jumping ship from traditional you know, forms of motorsport like IMSA. You know, Porsche or Audi are signing up to Formula E now rather than re-upping their efforts to, you know, develop spaceships for WEC. Yep, so, and that's a big shift, and I think something to acknowledge and pay attention to. Do you guys think, right, especially, do you think that electric motorsports is here to stay, and do you think that it is really something that, from a production side, you guys are taking seriously and looking at almost jumping ship to focus on those series as well? Or do you think that it's kind of, you know, it doesn't really matter if it has an engine or not, whether it's an electric motor or an internal combustion engine, that it's more about the story and the people involved? Or what do you think?
This is an excellent topic point. And, you know, opinions, everybody's got one. I think the F1 chat rooms are probably really abuzz with this topic. I was just like you when Formula E came out. I was like, this is stupid. What are these guys doing? And then watched a race just like you, and, oh, okay, this is different, but it's okay. And now, you know, all the major manufacturers are there. I think even Mercedes has jumped in now. That the big boys are interested. Obviously, Michael Andretti's got a big team. There's all the drivers are bad boys and girls. Simona Silvestro drove for a while over there. They're all top-notch drivers. So clearly, this is serious. And just looking at road cars in general and where the major motor manufacturers, auto manufacturers are headed. I mean, everybody's kind of diving into this electric thing. So it's here to stay. And the fact that it would certainly seem that it would cross over to karting sooner rather than later. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've heard electric karts are really fast.
Well, certainly the acceleration you experience with an electric motor is, you know, kind of unreal, right? And the one thing I think James and a lot of the people on the forums, on the KartPulse forums, commented on is the weight of, you know, carrying all those batteries around, and all of that must be immense. You know, Steve Preble comments, Formula E is awesome, just different style of racing. It's a technical problem with batteries. If and where they can figure out the real carbon fiber cycle or carbon cycle, motors will be back. I think in many ways, the challenges and the rate of development that you see in production of batteries and battery technology is similar to almost the dawn of the automobile age, right? You know, it takes leaps and bounds every year. So I think from that perspective, the opportunity for motorsports to really be, again, a developing ground for actual car technology that wins on Sunday and sells on Monday, from Formula E, actually there is actual potential for that, which I think since about the 1980s, I would argue, in a lot of motorsports really hasn't been the case. But then if you look from a recreational perspective, I'm just not sure yet. I think a lot of people, both that are knowledgeable about it and also just interested in terms of what does that mean for me and my karting hobby, are kind of in a wait-and-see mode. You know, if you drive an electric kart down at K1 speed, it kind of drives the same as one that's gas-powered. But how does that really lend itself in a performance karting market? I just don't know. So we'll have to see over time.
It'll take a while, for sure.
Well, it looks like James might be he might be coming back hopefully soon. Guys,
you're making us dinner, James.
Yeah, no, he's back now. He's making that. He's making his dinner with Polidori sausage. That's where he went.
I got a toddler here attacking me. But yeah, on the subject of electric carts, I think kind of just like cars, you could say that we still race horses. So I think the internal combustion engine is probably going to be around, and we're going to see more adoption of electric. For carts, like you said, for carts and cars, you can make electric EVs, electric vehicles, incredibly fast. You can't make them go incredibly fast and go for a very long time, but they make great drag racers. And there's some project electric cars out there that have the equivalent of like 120 horsepower. Now, granted, they weigh about 400 pounds before you sit in them, but it's an option. So we're going to see more and more electric. I think if you want to get like super like 40,000 foot level, I think what's probably pretty interesting is the direction that retail is going. Not retail karting, but retail stores like Macy's. There, you get this urban sprawl. Everything's moving towards online. You're getting a lot of these open spaces in urban areas, but internal combustion engine is really just not conducive for a series of different reasons. One, it's noisier, and lower frequency, so it travels further. So we may see more electric carts like UK and everything else in some of those situations. So from that perspective, it'll be interesting to see what happens. They're interesting to me just purely from a technical standpoint. I'd love to play with motors. It'd be fun. There's already some electric series. I know there's at least one in Sonoma right now. And when I say electric series, like they're turning somewhere between stock moto and 80cc shifter times. So it's the real deal. Yeah. I'll have to get the details on it. We spoke about it on the forums as well. But so there's pockets of it going on, for sure. But the weight is an issue. But I mean, obviously, people are still able to drive them, and comparatively speaking, I mean, it's still going to pull a lot more G than an equivalent road car, I think. How they, probably our biggest concern might be fires. When those batteries go on fire, that's bad, very bad.
Yeah.
And you can't just put it out with any old fire extinguisher. So I think that the protection of those cells, especially when you're carrying so many different cells and so many different wires in between them and so forth, I think that's probably going to be paramount. And I think that's what's good and interesting in that we've got the likes of Bosch, and we've got Rotax that are using, I think it's a power system by Bosch as well, involved just to kind of take care of that area of it, because that's definitely not something we're going to deal with. Is an electrical fire with lithium ion or lipos or any of those kind of batteries. But it looks like fun to drive. I'll definitely drive one. Samuel?
I think that was a good question, and something definitely to consider as time goes on. The safety is certainly an interesting issue. I'm not sure what I think of fan boost. I think that it would be interesting to open that up to karting dads to see what extreme levels they would go to get fan boost for little Johnny. I'm just trying to imagine.
Sure if it would be an equalizer, honestly. I don't know if it will be an equalizer. It'll just change the game. But I mean, through my looking at motors and controllers and stuff, there's just like a motor, there's different things you can do, even right down to advance and timing that you can do with motors to change their performance characteristics. So would it be a leveler? I don't know. We say that sometimes about injection on two-stroke engines, and it might be a leveler. There's really no guarantees. Somebody will always find something to tweak on them. But
of course. It's racing.
Right.
Yeah, racers will always find a way to gain an edge, whether it's spec or not, and whether it's electric or internal combustion. It may send a shockwave through karting to where people aren't sure what to do with them yet, but very quickly someone will figure it out. An example of that's kind of proof in that pudding is Mike Speed, Alex and Scott Speed's dad, in the mid-'90s. Was famous for coming out with a programmable CDI box for Supermoto, or Stock Moto at the time, Stock Moto. And just they blew everyone out of the water because it technically wasn't illegal, but no one else had thought to open those boxes up. Everyone else had just assumed it was just one of those things that you couldn't mess with. So I think that just shows that it may be for a short period of time, but within a few weeks, people are going to find a way to make a better mousetrap, make an electric motor faster. But we have talked about a wide range of questions and topics on this show. Wright, your addition to the show and your background has been really great. We appreciate you coming on.
Hey, man, thank you very much for having you, James. It's great meeting you, and hopefully we'll meet face-to-face one of these days.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get down your area at some point this year. We'll see. I would like to. It would be good.
And Eric, thank you for everything you've done for the sport in Colorado. I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I think, the biggest thing for me is going to the track and feeling like I have an active role in it and making an impact, and that's what keeps me coming back. So seeing people like you and your daughter having fun on track is pretty rewarding. So good luck going to the Olympics. Keep us posted.
Yeah.
Send us some cool Kart Pulse stuff,
Right.
behind the scenes stuff.
I'll be busy on Facebook for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody who joined today. We've been going almost 2 hours now, I think. Time flies, having fun.
Hope I haven't bored them stiff.
Thanks. Yeah, that's quite an endurance race right there. So thanks everybody who joined and shared. And we'll be back again. I mean, Sunday seems to be kind of a regular slot, but it is open depending on life, really, depending on what we get stuck on. So thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.